All right, let's dive into this. This is going to be interesting. We're looking at how unhealthy food policies have impacted American health and Big Pharma's role in it all. We've got some excerpts here from impact of unhealthy food policies on American health and Big Pharma's profits. And wow, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, you're not kidding. It really is a tangled web. You've got the government regulations, corporate strategies, and then individual choices all mixed up. It's fascinating, really.
And a little bit disheartening too, right? I mean, one of the things that really jumped out at me was how policies, uh, designed with good intentions, like making sure food is safe and affordable, might have actually led us down this road to a public health crisis.
Yeah, it's like a classic example of the law of unintended consequences. For decades, the focus has been on producing a lot of food cheaply.
Mm-hmm.
And while that's important, I guess somewhere along the way, we sort of lost sight of the long-term health effects of what we're eating.
It's true. And you just have to look around, right? I mean, unhealthy food is everywhere. Everywhere you look, it's loaded with sugar and salt and unhealthy fats.
Absolutely. And it's often, the cheapest option too,
Yeah.
which, well, we'll get to that. But I'm kind of curious, what about the role of the FDA and the USDA in all of this? They're the main regulatory bodies, aren't they?
Right, right. So the FDA, they're mainly focused on making sure our food is safe, that won't make us sick. And then the USDA, they're more focused on the quality and, the production of food. But this source makes a really good point. Are these agencies always putting public health first? Or are they being swayed by big corporations sometimes?
Yeah, that's an important question for sure. And the source actually brings up a pretty specific example. Remember all those emulsifiers and artificial flavors they put in processed foods? Well, there was a study in environmental science and technology that suggests these common additives could actually be messing with our gut bacteria. And that can lead to inflammation, metabolic disorders, all sorts of problems.
Really? Wow, I didn't know that. That's a little scary, actually. Why are those additives still allowed in our food then? I mean, if there's research suggesting they're harmful.
Well, it's complicated. It's not always a clear-cut case. But, another thing to consider is how government subsidies play into all this. A lot of processed food is made from ingredients like corn, soybeans, and wheat, right? Commodity crops. And these crops receive heavy government subsidies.
I see. So the government is actually helping to make the ingredients for unhealthy food cheaper?
That's essentially it. Yeah, those subsidies were initially meant to support farmers and make sure there's enough food to go around. But the way they're structured has kind of backfired. It's led to an overproduction of these specific ingredients that go into so many processed foods.
That's really interesting. And the source we're looking at, they cite a study from the Union of Concerned Scientists. It found that most federal subsidies go to these commodity crops, and very little goes to fruits and vegetables.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, you end up with a system where the stuff that goes into unhealthy food is cheaper and easier to get than the ingredients for, a healthy diet.
And then on top of that, you have all the marketing, right? All those ads pushing these cheap, unhealthy foods on us constantly.
Oh, absolutely. It's hard to escape it. And then you've got the food industry lobbying the government.
Oh, right. The source mentioned that. What's the deal with that? What's lobbying and how does it affect all this?
Well, lobbying is basically how industries try to influence government policies.
Mm.
And the food and beverage industry, they spend a ton of money on it every year, like millions and millions, according to this report from the Center for Responsive Politics.
So they're spending all this money to shape regulations in their favor, even if it means, those regulations might not be good for public health.
That's the worry, yeah. It's not just about the regulations themselves either. Lobbying can influence nutritional guidelines, research funding, basically everything that contributes to the overall, food environment.
Wow. We've only just scratched the surface here, but it's already pretty clear that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than most people realize. We've talked about the regulations and the corporate influence, but what about the science behind all of this? Like, how do these foods actually affect our bodies? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, me too. And that's actually where things start to get really interesting. The source delves into some pretty specific ways these unhealthy foods impact our health. Let's dive into that.
Okay, so we know unhealthy food is like everywhere and it's cheap and there's all this marketing pushing it on us, but how does it actually mess with our health? The source goes into some detail on this, right?
Yeah, it does. And the science is really, really interesting. One thing it points out is that processed foods they're designed to be hypopalatable, right? They're basically engineered to light up our reward systems.
Mm.
So we want more and more and more.
So it's not just like a lack of willpower or something. Like these foods are kind of made to be addictive.
Exactly. And then you add in the fact that they're like the cheapest and easiest option.
Yeah.
And you can see how we've gotten ourselves into this, well, this public health mess.
Yeah, no kidding. And the source actually breaks down the effects of these specific ingredients. You know, the sugar, the salt, the unhealthy fats. Let's start with sugar. What's the science on that?
Well, it cites a study in JAMA Internal Medicine,
Hmm.
and it links all this excess sugar, especially added sugars in processed food and drinks, to the obesity epidemic. And it also talks about how high fructose corn syrup, which is everywhere, contributes to fatty liver disease and insulin resistance, even heart disease.
Wow. It's crazy to think that something like sugar can do so much damage. What about salt? The source seems pretty worried about that too.
Oh yeah, it's a big problem. The American Heart Association says we should have no more than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. But the average American gets way more than that, like over 3,400 milligrams.
Mm,
And a lot of that comes from processed food.
that's a big difference. And the source connected that high sodium intake to high blood pressure, right? Hypertension, which I think you mentioned earlier is a major risk factor for heart disease and stroke.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's the unhealthy fats, trans fats, saturated fats, all that you find on a lot of processed foods. And the source actually mentions a study from the New England Journal of Medicine. It showed that if we cut back on trans fats, we could prevent thousands of heart attacks and deaths every year.
That's a pretty powerful statistic. It's kind of disturbing that those fats are still in so much of the food we eat.
It is. And there's one more thing the source brings up that's really fascinating to me: the gut microbiome.
Oh yeah, the gut microbiome. I've been hearing about that a lot lately, but I'm still not really sure what it is, to be honest. Can you explain it?
Sure. It's basically like a whole ecosystem of trillions of bacteria living in our digestive system.
Yeah.
And research is showing that these bacteria are super important for overall health, like way more than we used to think.
So how does all this unhealthy food affect the gut microbiome?
Well, the source cites some research by Sonnenberg, and it suggests that diets high in processed foods and low in fiber can throw off the balance of bacteria in our gut. And that can lead to chronic inflammation, metabolic disorders, even mental health issues.
Wow. It's amazing how like interconnected everything is, right? Like what we eat affects the bacteria in our gut and then that affects our physical and mental health. It
Uh,
really makes you think twice about what you're putting in your body.
it does. And that brings us to another point that the source really digs into: the role of big pharma. So we've been talking about how unhealthy foods cause all these chronic diseases, but what about the companies that profit from treating those diseases?
Yeah, that's something I've wondered about too. It seems kind of backwards, doesn't it? Big pharma makes money treating these diseases that are like linked to all this unhealthy food we're talking about.
It does, and the source actually addresses that ethical dilemma. It asks the question: does big pharma have a vested interest in keeping this system going?
Yeah.
Where these preventable diseases are so common.
That's a tough question. But the source doesn't stop there. It also looks at the economic realities, right?
The source cites data from the CDC that shows that chronic diseases, things like heart disease and diabetes, account for something like 75% of our national healthcare spending. That's a ton of money going towards treating conditions that, could have been prevented in the first place.
So how does big pharma make money from all this spending?
Well, they're the ones that develop and sell the drugs to manage these conditions, and a lot of these conditions, they require ongoing treatment. So the costs really add up. There's a report by the Commonwealth Fund, and it found that the U.S. actually spends more on pharmaceuticals per person than any other country, and the prices just keep going up and up.
It's like a double whammy for people struggling with these health problems. They're dealing with the health consequences of this, unhealthy food system, and then they get hit with these these high drug costs on top of it.
It's a serious concern. And the source makes another kind of unsettling point. It talks about the close ties between big pharma and the agencies that are supposed to regulate
Or
them.
you mean the FDA, the one that approves those food additives we talked about?
Yep, that's the one. The source describes this thing called the revolving door, where you have people who work for big pharma going to work for the FDA and vice versa.
So you could have someone who used to work for a drug company, making decisions about the regulations for that same company's drugs.
Exactly, and that raises some concerns about conflicts of interest. Is industry influence winning out over public health?
The source actually cited a study, it was in JAMA Internal Medicine, and it found that these financial ties between drug companies and regulators are pretty common. It's kind of disturbing to think about, that these decisions that affect our health could be swayed by money.
Hmm. Yeah, it is a complicated issue for sure, and there aren't any easy answers. But the source is basically encouraging us to think about these relationships and to really question the forces that shape our food system and our health in general.
So far, this has been kind of a depressing deep dive, to be honest. We've got policies that, accidentally encourage people to eat unhealthy food. Then you've got a powerful food industry lobbying for their interests. And then there's all this scientific evidence linking this food to chronic diseases. And now Big Pharma is profiting from it all. It's kind of overwhelming.
I know it can be, but it's important to remember that we're not, completely powerless in this situation. The last part of the source actually focuses on solutions, like
Wow.
what we can do as individuals to navigate this whole mess.
Okay, good. I'm ready for some good news. What kind of solutions are we talking about? What can we actually do to change things?
That's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
All right, we're back and ready to wrap up this deep dive into unhealthy food and big pharma. It's been heavy stuff, but you mentioned that the source actually points to some potential solutions, right? So what can we do? I think we could all use a little bit of hope right now.
Yeah, for sure. It's easy to get, bogged down in the doom and gloom. But the source is really clear. We're not helpless. Like our individual choices and collective action, they can actually make a difference.
Okay, that's good to hear. But what can we do, like as individuals? I mean, where do we even start?
Well, uh, the source talks a lot about, awareness, education, advocacy, all that. It all starts with understanding the problem, right? Like the more you know about this stuff, the better choices you can make.
So knowledge is power. I get that. But what does that look like in real life?
Well, think about, reading food labels, really paying attention to what's in your food, like those added sugars we talked about, the sodium levels, the unhealthy fats, and try to choose products with, fewer processed ingredients, more whole foods, stuff like that.
So basically, going back to basics, like cooking more at home, choosing fresh produce over packaged stuff, watching your portion sizes, all that.
Exactly. Yeah. Those are great first steps. And don't underestimate supporting your local farmers markets or community gardens. They often have healthier, more sustainable options.
It's about like putting your money where your mouth is.
Right.
Supporting businesses and organizations that are trying to make a positive difference.
Right. Exactly. And it goes beyond just, what you buy. You can use your voice too.
What do you mean?
Talk about it, like with friends, family.
Yeah.
Share what you've learned about the food system and get people thinking about their own choices.
Yeah.
And support groups that are working on this stuff.
Yeah.
Like reforming food policies, improving school lunches, getting fresh food to communities that don't have it.
It's like a ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
You start making changes and it spreads to other people.
Yeah, totally. And don't forget about, contacting your elected officials. Let them know you care about this and that you want them to prioritize public health over corporate interests.
Yeah, voting, writing letters, going to those town hall meetings, all that. It all adds up. Right.
It does. It does. The future of our food system, it's not set in stone. Like it's something we're all creating together, with the choices we make every day.
Well, this has been a real eye-opening deep dive. We've learned some pretty hard truths about the food system, but also that, we can do something about it. It's not about, blaming ourselves or getting overwhelmed. It's about taking action, even if it's, a small step.
Absolutely. Every healthy meal you choose, every conversation you have about this, every time you speak up for change, it all makes a difference.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through all this. It's complicated, but I feel like I've learned a lot, and honestly, I'm feeling pretty inspired to make some changes.
That's great to hear. And remember, stay informed, stay curious, keep asking questions. That's how we're gonna really make a difference.
And on that note, that's a wrap on this deep dive into unhealthy food policies and big pharma. We hope you found it informative and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.